I am 60 years old, and I have learned the hard way that the phone ringing at 2 in the morning is never good news. In 60 years, no one has ever called me at that hour to tell me something wonderful. My name is Dorothy Callahan. Everyone calls me Dot, except my husband Frank, who has called me Dotty since our second date in 1988. Back when he was a shy engineering student, and I was a nursing student who thought he talked too much about bridges and not enough about anything else. We've been married 36 years now. We raised one son, Derek, in a modest split level in Rockford, Illinois, and I spent 30 years working the overnight shift at Rockford Memorial Hospital before I finally retired 2 years ago. If there is one thing 3 decades of night shift nursing teaches you, it is how to wake up instantly, fully, and with your wits completely about you, the moment a phone rings in the dark. That skill, as it turned out, would matter more on this particular night than I could have possibly imagined. Derek is 34 now. He's a good son, mostly, a little impulsive with money, a little too quick to believe the next opportunity will be the one that finally makes everything easier, but good-hearted underneath it. The way his father was at that age too. He married a woman named Chloe 6 years ago, sharp and driven, works in marketing for a mid-sized firm in Chicago. They live a comfortable but not extravagant life 90 minutes from us. We talk most weeks. We see them most months. It is by most measures an ordinary decent family. On the night this story begins, Frank and I had gone to bed around 10, same as always. I remember exactly what I was dreaming when the phone rang. Something forgettable, gardening I think, moving mulch around in a yard that wasn't actually mine. And then the phone was ringing on my nightstand. That particular default ringtone I've never bothered to change, and I was awake before the second ring finished. The old night shift reflex kicking in before my conscious mind had even caught up. I looked at the screen. Derek, it said. Clear as anything, his contact photo, a picture from 3 Christmases ago, him in a ridiculous reindeer sweater Chloe had bought him as a joke, lighting up my dark bedroom. Derek? I answered, already sitting up. Already alert in the particular way that only mothers of adult children fully understand. The way your body treats any late-night call from your child as a potential emergency regardless of how old they are, or how long it's been since you last worried about them crossing a street safely. The voice on the other end was Derek's voice. I want to be very clear about that, because it matters enormously to everything that happened afterward. It was his voice, his exact inflection, even a small verbal habit he's had since childhood. A little catch in his throat before he says something he's nervous about. If you had played me an audio clip with no other context, I would have staked my life on it being my son. Mom, the voice said, breathless, panicked. Mom. I need your help, this is really bad. Derek, what's wrong? Where are you? I'm at a hotel. It's a work thing, I told you about the conference, remember? I'm at the Windermere, downtown, and my card just got declined at checkout. Both cards, actually. And the front desk is saying if I don't pay right now, they're going to call hotel security. They're saying it's some kind of policy thing, I don't understand it. But Mom, they won't let me leave until this is sorted. I need you to send $9,000 right now. I'll pay you back the second I'm home. I swear, please. I'm really scared. They're standing right here. I want to walk you through exactly what was happening in my mind during those roughly 40 seconds. Because I think it matters for anyone who ever finds themselves in a similar position. And because so much of what happened next depended on details most people would never think to notice at 2 in the morning, half asleep. Hearing their child sound frightened, first, Derek had never once mentioned a work conference to me. We had talked on Sunday, 3 days earlier, a full hour-long call about nothing in particular, his fantasy football league. Chloe's mother visiting next month, a leaky faucet he'd finally fixed. A conference the following week would have come up. It simply would have. Second, the number on my screen, while it displayed Derek, was something my night shift-trained brain flagged almost immediately, in the way you notice a patient's vitals look slightly off before you can articulate exactly why. Something about the cadence of the voice, the specific panic in it, felt performed in a way I couldn't yet name but instinctive distrusted. Not because it sounded fake exactly, but because it sounded like exactly what someone would imagine panic sounding like. Rather than how Derek actually sounds when he's genuinely upset, which, having raised him for 34 years, I happen to know intimately. My real son, when frightened, goes quiet and clipped, not breathless and rambling. Fear makes him economical with words, not expansive. Third, and most importantly, the number for a wire transfer of exactly $9,000, requested with extreme urgency, in the middle of the night. Designed to trigger a parent's fear before their judgment could fully engage. Every nursing instinct I had. Every instinct sharpened over 3 decades of watching how people behave in crisis versus how people behave when they're being manipulated, was screaming at me that something about this call did not add up. "Derek," I said, keeping my voice level, "give me the hotel's number. I'll call them directly and sort out the payment with them." There was a pause, brief but there. A half-second too long for someone standing at a hotel counter under active pressure to produce a phone number he presumably had right in front of him. "Mom, there's no time, they need it now. Just send it to the account I'm texting you, please." "I'm begging you, Derek," I said again. "Put the front desk person on the phone. I'll talk to them directly." Another pause. Then, "They're not. They said family members can't verify this over the phone. It has to come from me, Mom, please. Just trust me, this is really serious." And there it was. That was the moment, that single sentence, that told me with total certainty that I was not talking to my son. Here is something I know about Derek that no scammer, however sophisticated, could possibly script correctly. My son has never once in his adult life asked me to just trust him during a moment of genuine crisis. It isn't in his nature. When Derek was 17 and got into a genuinely frightening car accident on Highway 20, his first call to me wasn't panicked pleading. It was almost eerily calm, giving me the mile marker, the tow truck company's name. The exact details I'd need to help him, because underneath the fear, my son has always been a person who reaches for information and specifics when things go wrong, not vague appeals to blind trust. Fear makes him more precise, not less. Whoever was on that phone had built a convincing voice, but they had not built my actual son. "Call your wife," I said. "What?" "If you need $9,000 in the middle of the night, Derek, call Chloe. She has access to your joint accounts. I'm going to call you back on your actual number in 5 minutes, and if everything is fine, we'll sort it out then." "Mom, wait, don't hang up, you don't understand, this is." I hung up the phone. I sat there in the dark for a long moment, my heart pounding despite the calm I'd managed to project into my voice, Frank stirring awake beside me, murmuring, "Dottie, what's going on?" "I think someone just tried to scam us pretending to be Derek," I said. Already dialing Derek's actual number from my contacts, the same number, technically, that had just called me, which was itself deeply unsettling, though I would only fully understand the mechanics of that later. The phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. My stomach dropped, despite everything my training and instinct had told me moments earlier. I texted him. "Someone just called me from your number saying you're stuck at a hotel needing $9,000. Call me the second you see this." No response. I lay back down, Frank now fully awake beside me, both of us staring at the ceiling in the dark, and for the first time since the call, I let myself feel the fear underneath the calm I'd projected. Because being confident you've identified a scam and being 100% certain your child is safe are 2 very different feelings. And only one of them is comfortable enough to actually let you sleep. I did not sleep again that night. I lay there until the sun came up, phone on my chest, waiting.
Frank wanted to call the police immediately. I understand why. It's the instinct of a frightened parent, and Frank has always been the one in our marriage more inclined toward immediate, decisive action, while I've always been the one more inclined to gather information first, a habit that 30 years of triage nursing will absolutely instill in a person. I told him to wait at least until morning, unless we heard something that genuinely indicated an emergency beyond the obvious scam attempt. What if it's not a scam? What if something actually happened to him and this call was just some kind of, I don't know, some kind of cover? It was a fair question, and one I'd already been turning over myself in the dark. The voice was too good to be a coincidence, Frank. It was his voice, his exact way of talking. That's not a stranger improvising. That's something more deliberate. How does someone even do that? I didn't fully know, not that night. I would learn over the following days about a particular kind of fraud that had become increasingly common: AI-generated voice cloning. Built from mere seconds of publicly available audio, a video posted online, a voicemail greeting, a clip from a wedding toast shared on social media, it takes remarkably little source material now, apparently, for a sophisticated enough program to reconstruct a convincing approximation of someone's voice, particularly over a phone connection already degraded by distance and static, which conveniently smooths over some of the subtler imperfections a machine-generated voice might otherwise have. We didn't know any of that yet, at 3 a.m, lying in the dark. What we knew was this: someone had called me, using my son's actual phone number, or a number spoofed to display as his, using a voice that was either my son's real voice under real duress or an extraordinarily convincing fake, demanding a large sum of money with the exact kind of urgency-based pressure that con artists have used since long before AI existed, just refined now into something far more dangerous. I texted Chloe around 3:30 a.m. Unable to wait any longer despite the hour. Chloe, so sorry to text this late, but is Derek okay? Someone called me from his number saying he was stuck at a hotel and needed money urgently. I want to make sure he's safe. The response came faster than I expected, at nearly 4 a.m. He's asleep right next to me. He's been home all night. We watched a movie and went to bed around 11. What's going on? I felt something in my chest loosen. Just slightly, though the fuller relief wouldn't come until I actually heard his voice directly. I called Chloe rather than continuing to text, and she woke Derek, who came on the line groggy, confused, and increasingly alarmed as I explained what had happened. Mom, that's insane. I've been home all night. I don't even know a hotel called the Windermere. Someone actually called you pretending to be me. It sounded exactly like you, Derek. If I hadn't noticed a few things that felt off, I would have believed it completely. Mom, that's genuinely terrifying. He was quiet for a moment. How much did they ask for? $9,000. Jesus. Another pause. What tipped you off? I told him, the missing context about a conference, the specific texture of the panic that didn't quite match how he actually behaves under stress. The moment the voice told me to just trust him rather than offering any verifiable specifics. Derek was quiet on the other end of the line for a long moment. Mom, I need you to understand something, he finally said, his voice different now. More serious than I think I'd heard it in years. If you hadn't caught that, if this had happened to literally anyone else, to Chloe's parents, to your friends, to anyone who wasn't a retired ER nurse with 30 years of reading people under stress, they would have sent the money. Almost anybody would have sent the money. He wasn't wrong. And that realization sat heavily with me for the rest of that long night. We are all of us, trained by love to respond instantly to our children's fear. That instinct is one of the best things about being a parent, and it is also, apparently, one of the most exploitable. We called the local police non-emergency line around 6 a.m, once it felt like a reasonable hour, to report the attempted fraud. The officer who took our information was polite, but frankly, not especially reassuring. This kind of scam, he told us, had become increasingly common over the past year, AI voice cloning technology having become cheap and accessible enough that even unsophisticated scam operations were now using it. Usually working off audio scraped from social media videos, wedding live streams, TikToks, anything with a clear recording of a target's voice. Derek, it turned out, had posted a short video on his professional networking profile just 2 months earlier, a 30-second clip introducing himself for a project pitch, his voice clear and unobstructed for the entire duration. It was, the officer said, more than enough source material for the kind of software now widely available to criminal networks. You did everything right, the officer told me, verifying through a second channel. Refusing to send money without direct confirmation, that's exactly the protocol we recommend, and honestly, most people don't follow it because in the moment panic wins. I thanked him, gave him what details I could, including the number that had displayed on my caller ID, which he told me was almost certainly spoofed and would likely lead nowhere on its own. He said someone would follow up if anything developed, but he was honest that these cases, especially ones where no money actually changed hands, rarely resulted in identified suspects. I hung up the phone that morning feeling a strange, complicated mixture of relief and unease. Relief that Derek was safe, that my instincts had held under pressure, that 30 years of reading frightened people in emergency rooms had apparently prepared me for exactly this moment in a way I could never have predicted. But unease, too. Because something about the whole incident felt unfinished, like a thread left dangling that someone, somewhere, still intended to pull. I did not yet know how right that unease would turn out to be.
2 mornings later, at a far more reasonable hour, 9 a.m., sunlight properly up, coffee already made, my phone rang again. This time the screen displayed an unfamiliar number with a Chicago area code, and beneath it the small grey text. Suspected spam. Ordinarily I would have let it go to voicemail, but something about the timing so close to the incident 2 nights earlier made me answer instead. Mrs. Callahan. This is Detective Ray Alvarez with the Chicago Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. Do you have a few minutes? My stomach tightened immediately, old instincts flaring. Yes, of course. Is this about the call I reported to our local police 2 nights ago? It is, actually, and I want to start by saying, you're one of several people we've now identified as targets of what appears to be a fairly organized operation. And your report was helpful in connecting some pieces we'd already been working on. He explained, over the following 20 minutes, a story that was, frankly, larger and more disturbing than I had imagined lying awake 2 nights earlier. The operation targeting me was not an isolated incident. It was part of a coordinated scheme that had, over the preceding several months, targeted at least 11 families across the greater Chicago area. Using publicly available video and audio, professional networking clips, wedding videos posted to social media, even old university graduation footage in one case, to clone the voices of adult children. Then calling their parents late at night with nearly identical scripts, a manufactured crisis involving hotels, rental cars, or in 2 cases, fabricated arrests requiring urgent bail money. Most of the targets were parents in their 60s and 70s, Detective Alvarez told me. That's not a coincidence. These operations specifically target that demographic, statistically more likely to have accumulated savings. And statistically, frankly, more likely to trust a familiar voice without questioning it as aggressively as a younger person, raised with more awareness of these kinds of scams. How much money have they gotten? Almost afraid of the answer. Across the cases we know about, just over $340,000. 2 families sent significantly more than the initial ask, because the scammers kept the call going. Invented additional emergencies, once the first payment went through, kept the panic escalating in real time. One family lost almost $60,000 over the course of a single night. I sat with that number for a long moment, thinking about how close I had come, not to being fooled exactly, my instincts had held, but to the sheer terror of those 40 seconds on the phone, the very real, physical fear that had gripped me, even with decades of training working in my favor. I thought about parents without that training, without a lifetime of reading frightened voices for a living, sitting in the dark at 2 in the morning, doing exactly what any loving parent's instincts would scream at them to do, protect their child immediately, without hesitation. How did you catch them? I asked. Honestly, Mrs. Callahan, your call helped more than you know. Most victims either don't report it because they're embarrassed, or they report it too late after the money's already gone when there's very little we can actually trace. You reported it within hours, with specific details about the number displayed, the exact script used, the precise time of the call. That let us cross-reference it against other reports coming in from different jurisdictions and identify a pattern. Several of these calls were routed through the same small cluster for spoofing services, which eventually let us trace back to an operation running out of a rented office space in the northwest suburbs. You caught them. We executed a warrant yesterday afternoon. 3 arrests so far. Likely more coming as we work through the financial trail. I wanted to call you directly, partly as a courtesy, since your report was genuinely useful, and partly because I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to provide a formal statement. It would help strengthen the case significantly, particularly since you're one of the only reported targets who didn't lose any money, which gives us a clean account of the attempted method without the complication of financial recovery proceedings tangled into it. I agreed immediately, of course. But there was one more thing weighing on me, something I needed to ask.
"Detective, can I ask?" The voice that called me. It was so exact. My son's specific verbal habits, things I don't think even a very good actor could replicate without actually knowing him. How is that even possible? It's genuinely remarkable technology, and genuinely terrifying in the wrong hands, he said. The software these operations use now needs shockingly little source audio, sometimes as little as 10 or 15 seconds of clear speech, to generate a synthetic voice model that can then say anything the scammer types, in real time. During a live call, adjusting tone and inflection based on scripted emotional cues. Your son's networking video, the one he posted a couple months back, that's almost certainly the source. It's part of why we've started actively advising people to think carefully about what voice and video content they post publicly, even seeming to be enhanced by professional content. It's not really about hiding from the world. It's about understanding that any clear audio of your voice is now, unfortunately, potential raw material for something like this. I thanked him, gave him everything he needed, and hung up the phone feeling a strange, heavy mixture of vindication and grief. Vindication that my instincts, sharpened over decades of work I genuinely loved, had protected my family from real financial harm. Grief for a world where a 30-second video of your own son introducing himself for a work project could become a weapon aimed back at the people who love him most. I called Derek immediately to tell him everything. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. "Mom," he finally said, "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't picked up on any of it. If it had been Dad who answered instead. Or if I'd been away at an actual conference that week and it would have seemed more plausible. We could have lost $9,000, easy. Maybe more, if they kept escalating like they did with those other families." "But you didn't," I said. "Because I did pick up on it." "Yeah," he said, and I could hear something in his voice shift, something that had clearly been sitting with him since I first told him about the call 2 nights earlier. "Mom, I don't think I've ever really thought about what it actually means that you spent 30 years doing what you did. I think I always just sort of took it for granted, like, oh, Mum was a nurse. That's just what she did for work. I never really connected it to like an actual skill set that would matter this much, this specifically in a moment like that. It matters to me that you're safe," I said. "That's all that actually matters here." "I know. But I want you to know I see it now. What you did, catching that in real time in the middle of the night, half asleep, that wasn't luck, Mom. That was 30 years of you learning how to read people at their worst moments, and it just saved us. It saved us $9,000 we genuinely could not have easily afforded to lose. And it might have saved us a lot more than that, if they'd kept going the way they did with those other families." I sat with that for a moment, feeling something warm settle in my chest, despite the residual unease of the whole ordeal. The particular satisfaction of being seen clearly, finally, for a version of competence that had operated quietly in the background of my whole adult life, largely unacknowledged by the people who benefited most from it. I gave my formal statement to Detective Alvarez's office the following week, driving down to Chicago with Frank, who insisted on coming along, partly for support and partly, I think, because he still hadn't fully processed the fear of that night and needed to see the process through to something resembling closure. The case, as it developed over the following months, then turned out to be larger than even the detective's initial account suggested. The operation had been running for nearly a year before it was finally shut down, and the eventual count of confirmed victims climbed to 19 families, with total losses exceeding $410,000. 3 of the 11 initially identified targets, I later learned, were also retired healthcare workers, nurses, an ER physician, a hospice social worker, which struck me as a strange, specific kind of irony. The people whose entire careers had trained them to recognize manufactured crisis were apparently being targeted at roughly the same rate as anyone else, which told me something important. The technology had become good enough that even trained instincts weren't a reliable enough defense on their own. What actually protected me, in the end, wasn't just my nursing background. It was a specific, learnable habit. Verify through an independent channel before acting on urgent financial requests, no matter how convincing, no matter how frightened the voice on the other end sounds. I've told this story many times since, to friends. To Frank's siblings, at a community safety seminar, the local police department invited me to speak at 3 months later,
because Detective Alvarez had, true to his word, kept me updated as the case developed, and eventually asked if I'd be willing to share my experience publicly as part of an elder fraud awareness initiative the department was launching. I said yes without hesitation. If sharing what happened to me on one terrifying night could spare even one other family the terror I felt, or worse, the very real financial loss 19 other families suffered, it seemed like the least I could do with an experience I would honestly rather have never had at all. At that seminar, standing in front of about 60 people, mostly retirees like myself, I told them the 3 things I now believe every parent needs to hear, the 3 lessons that emerged clearly from that long, frightening night. First, no legitimate emergency anywhere, under any circumstances, requires you to wire money in the middle of the night without independently verifying the situation through a separate channel. Real hotels do not demand emergency wire transfers from parents at 2 a.m. Real arrests do not require immediate bail wired directly to a stranger on the phone. The urgency itself, the demand that you act right now, before you have time to think, before you have time to verify, is not a feature of a genuine crisis. It is the entire mechanism of the scam. Second, hang up and call back on a number you already have saved, one you know to be genuine, not a number given to you during the call itself. If the person claiming to be your child cannot be reached that way, call another family member, a spouse, a sibling, anyone who might independently confirm their whereabouts before you act. Third, and perhaps the one that has stayed with me most, trust the specific, granular knowledge you have of the people you love, even when a voice on the phone sounds exactly right. I knew Derek's voice. I also knew Derek's actual patterns under stress, his tendency toward precision rather than panic, his instinct to offer verifiable details rather than vague appeals to trust. A cloned voice can replicate sound. It cannot replicate 34 years of watching someone grow, argue, cry, and cope. That knowledge, it turns out, is a kind of security no scammer has yet figured out how to fake. Derek came to that seminar, actually, sitting in the 3rd row beside Chloe, and at the end, when the department asked if any family members present wanted to add anything, he stood up, unprompted, something he'd never mentioned planning to me beforehand. "I just want to say," he said, a little nervously, addressing the room rather than me directly, "that my mum saved us a huge amount of money and a lot of heartache because she trusted what she actually knew about me over what a very convincing fake voice was telling her. And I think a lot of us, myself included, honestly, don't always take the time to really understand what our parents' life experience actually taught them, until something like this happens and it turns out that experience is the exact thing standing between our family and disaster. So, thanks, Mom. I don't think I've said that enough about a lot of things, not just this. I won't pretend I didn't tear up a little, standing there in a community centre meeting room under fluorescent lighting, at 60 years old, being thanked by my grown son in front of a room full of strangers for a skill I'd spent 30 years building, without ever imagining it would one night stand between my family and a scam sophisticated enough to nearly fool anyone. Epilogue. 1 year later, the 3 men eventually arrested in connection with the scam operation pled guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud and identity theft. 2 received sentences of several years. The third, who cooperated with investigators, received a reduced sentence in exchange for information that helped authorities identify a larger network operating similar schemes across 4 states. Derek took down that old networking video shortly after everything happened, and now, whenever he posts anything with audio publicly, he thinks twice about it in a way he never used to. A small permanent change in how our family thinks about privacy, one none of us would have considered necessary before that night. We still talk every Sunday, same as always, but there's something different now, some layer added to how Derek and I relate to each other, a mutual respect that feels earned rather than assumed. The particular closeness that grows between people who have been genuinely tested by something and come out the other side more honest with each other than before. I am 60 years old. I spent 30 years working nights in an emergency room, learning to read fear and manipulation and genuine crisis apart from each other in real time, under pressure, with no time to think it through slowly. I never once imagined That skill would end up protecting my own family from a threat that didn't even exist when I first learned the job. People ask me sometimes if I'm angry about what happened. Angry that someone would use technology to impersonate my own child, to weaponize the sound of his voice against the very people who love him most. I am angry some days. But mostly, when I think about that night now, I feel something closer to gratitude. Gratitude for 30 years of experience I once thought I'd left behind at retirement. Gratitude that it turned out to still be exactly what my family needed. At exactly the moment we needed it most, the voice on the phone that night sounded exactly like my son. But it wasn't my son. And the difference between those two things, a familiar sound and an actual known, deeply understood person, turned out to be the only thing standing between my family and disaster. I intend to keep trusting that difference for as long as I'm able. It has, so far, never once let me down.